They warned him that loving her would ruin him, that she was a danger he should never embrace. But the heart doesn't bend to fear, and his only sin was falling for the one girl the world told him to despise. In the space between passion and destruction, his fate began to bleed away. Liam never meant for it to happen the way it did. At first, it was just a glance, a fleeting moment in the crowded hallway of his high school, where laughter and cruelty often shared the same walls. He had seen Aurora before, but never like that. That day, she wasn't just another face in the blur of students. She was something sharp against the dullness of his routine. She was the girl people whispered about, the one they said wasn't like the rest, the one they told him to stay away from. But Liam had never been one to listen when the world tried to dictate his heart. Something inside him stirred, something he couldn't name, a hunger that reached deeper than curiosity. The more he tried to push her from his thoughts, the stronger her image burned into him. It wasn't just her beauty, though she carried it in a way that felt defiant, almost dangerous. It was the way she moved with a kind of quiet strength. The air around her seemed charged, as if she were both a storm and the calm after it. He noticed how her eyes lingered on books longer than people, how her voice carried a weight when she spoke, as if each word cost her something. Every detail etched itself into Liam's mind until it became impossible not to see her everywhere. At first, he told himself it was nothing more than intrigue, the way one might study a secret locked inside a stranger. But obsession doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly, feeding off every stolen glance, every accidental brush of shoulders, every imagined moment when no one else was watching. Liam began looking for excuses to be where she was. If Aurora sat in the library, he would wander the aisles until he found a book that wasn't important, pretending to read while his eyes drifted to her. If she lingered near the edge of the cafeteria, choosing a seat far from the others, he would follow with his tray, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion, but close enough to hear her soft laughter when she read something that amused her. His friends noticed the change before he admitted it to himself. They teased him about the way his eyes searched a room, about the restless energy that made him sit on the edge of his chair, about the silence that replaced his usual sharp wit. When they caught him staring at Aurora once, they didn't laugh, they sneered. "Her?" one of them said with disgust, his voice dripping with something venomous. "She's not even, you know." The unfinished sentence hung in the air like a knife, and though Liam wanted to defend her, he swallowed the words. Defiance wasn't bravery when it meant exposing the truth of what was eating him alive. But even fear couldn't stop the pull. Each day, Aurora seemed more impossible to ignore. Liam began to memorize the way strands of her hair escaped when she tied it back, how her hands moved when she wrote, long fingers gripping the pen as if each word mattered more than it should. He thought of her voice late at night, replaying the sound of it until sleep came heavy and restless. And then came the dreams, vivid and unrelenting, where she stood at the edge of something he could never reach. Every time he woke, his chest ached with a longing that words could not soften. There were moments when he hated himself for it, when the shame of his secret pressed so tightly against his ribs he could barely breathe. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not for her, not when everyone reminded him who she was, what she was. Their warnings filled his ears like sirens. Dangerous, wrong, unnatural. But the heart does not bend to rules, and Liam's heart had already been claimed. The more they told him to stay away, the deeper he fell into the shadow she cast. Their words only added fire to the hunger, as though loving her was a rebellion he couldn't resist. He began writing about her in the margins of his notebooks. Not her name, never that. It was too risky, too easy to trace back to him. Instead, he filled the pages with fragments, pieces of her that only he could understand. A line about the way light bent in her eyes. A phrase about silence that wasn't empty but alive. Sketches of hands and hair and the curve of a smile he never admitted he longed for. His notebooks became graveyards of longing, places where he buried everything he could not speak aloud. But obsession is a hungry thing, and it never settles for silence. Soon, Liam's desire twisted into something restless, something that demanded more than distance. He began catching himself imagining what it would be like to speak to her, to sit close enough to hear her breath, to let his fingers graze hers under the weight of secrecy. Each time he passed her in the hallway, the world seemed to slow, voices fading until only the sound of her footsteps filled his ears. It wasn't enough anymore to watch from the corners, to be the ghost of her presence. He wanted her attention, her acknowledgement, something that would prove he wasn't invisible to her, and so the secrecy grew heavier, dragging him further into the shadows of his own desire. Liam stopped caring about the laughter of his friends, about the warnings whispered in dark corners, about the disgust in their voices. None of it mattered when compared to the way she made him feel alive, as though he had been sleepwalking his entire life and only now had awakened to color, to danger, to love. The more they tried to fill him with fear, the more determined he became to feed the obsession that had already carved its place inside him. Yet with every stolen glance, and every silent longing, a darker truth loomed over him. The deeper his secret grew, the harder it became to control. What began as a whisper in his mind now thundered in his veins, and Liam knew he was on the edge of something that could not be undone. Aurora was never meant to be anyone's salvation, but to Liam, she became the one flicker of light in a life swallowed by shadows. He had carried the weight of silence for as long as he could remember. Silence in his home, where his father's rage turned every word into a weapon, and silence among his friends where cruelty disguised itself as loyalty. Yet in Aurora's presence, even when she did not notice him, something in that silence broke apart. She was not a savior by choice, not a figure carved out for him to lean on, but simply by existing. She became the single breath of air in a world that choked him daily. He began to watch the way she moved through pain with a quiet defiance, a grace that others mistook for arrogance. When whispers followed her down the hall, she did not flinch. When cruel eyes lingered too long, she stared back, unshaken as though daring them to try and destroy what she had built inside herself. Liam knew she was not untouched by it all. He could see the cracks, the faint tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking, the weariness in her gaze at the end of each day. But instead of breaking, she carried that weight like a crown. It wasn't strength in the way people admired. It was survival, brutal and relentless, and to Liam it was radiant. Every detail of her existence became a kind of salvation for him. The way her laughter slipped out unexpectedly, soft and rare, was enough to silence the storms inside his head. The way she spoke in class, steady and unashamed, gave him courage he had never known he needed. Even her silence when she sat in the farthest corner of the library with her books piled high became a kind of refuge. He found himself timing his steps with hers, matching his days to hers in ways that felt accidental but were anything but. He didn't need her words to save him. Her presence alone was enough to make the darkness loosen its grip on him, if only for a moment. At home, when the shouting began and walls trembled with anger, Liam would close his eyes and think of Aurora. He would remember the warmth in her voice when she asked a teacher a question, the way her eyes softened when she was deep in thought, and the rhythm of her steps as she crossed the school courtyard. Those memories became his shield. He would whisper her name in his mind, though never aloud, because even the sound of it in the air felt too fragile, too dangerous to release. She was not his, and she might never be. But she was the only thing that made him believe there was something worth holding on for. The truth he dared not admit was that he needed her more than he wanted her. Wanting was hunger, but needing, that was survival. Without her, the world pressed down until his chest caved in, until breathing felt like punishment. With her, even from a distance, he could convince himself that life still held fragments of beauty. His friends did not understand why he had grown quieter, why the sharp edges of his laughter had dulled. They thought he was distracted, maybe broken. But the truth was simpler. He was consumed by her light, the fragile fire that kept him alive while the rest of the world turned to ash around him. In the secret corners of his mind, Liam began to imagine what it would be like if she saw him, not just glanced past him, not just existed in the same space, but truly saw him. He imagined her gaze meeting his with recognition, imagined her voice saying his name as though it mattered, imagined her smile directed at him and no one else. Those fantasies weren't grand or elaborate. They were simple, almost fragile things. A conversation, a moment of closeness, a shared secret. In a life where everything felt like it was slipping out of his control, those small imaginings were enough to keep him steady. Yet obsession wrapped itself in his devotion, twisting need into something sharper. He began to believe that Aurora wasn't just someone he admired. She was the reason he endured the cruelty of his days, the anchor that kept him from vanishing into the dark. She became not only his light but his compass, and the thought of losing that light filled him with a fear deeper than anything he had ever known. If she disappeared, if someone succeeded in breaking her, if she slipped away from the world that hated her, then Liam knew the last piece of himself would vanish with her. So he watched. Quietly, silently, always in the periphery, clinging to the brightness she carried even when she didn't mean to. Aurora had no idea what she had become to him. She didn't know that in the cold, relentless nights, she was the only warmth that kept him from sinking. She didn't know that her very existence was the thread that held his fractured soul together. She didn't know that in the heart of a boy consumed by silence and fear, she had become the one fragile light he could never let go of. It began with whispers, the kind that slither through hallways and cling to walls long after the voices are gone. Liam had always known people talked about Aurora. Cruelty was the only language some of them spoke. But this time, the whispers weren't just about her. They were about him. A name spoken too close to hers, a glance held too long, a rumor twisting into something poisonous. At first, he tried to ignore it, convincing himself that no one could see the truth he carried so carefully inside. But secrets are fragile things, and once cracks begin to show, they spread like fire. The boys he called friends were the first to turn their suspicion into mockery. They caught him looking one too many times, saw the way his silence deepened whenever Aurora entered the room. "You're not actually into her, right?" One of them jeered, laughter edged with malice. Liam forced a smile, forced a joke, but his voice shook, and they noticed. They always noticed. What began as teasing soon grew sharper, crueler. His friends didn't just laugh. They warned him, threatened him with exile, with disgust, with the kind of betrayal that made his stomach twist. The whispers spread beyond them, carried by mouths eager for destruction. Liam started hearing his name paired with hers in the corners of the school, in the muttered tones of strangers who smirked when he passed. Sometimes the words were drenched in mockery, sometimes in venom, sometimes in pity, but always they cut. "He's got a thing for her. He doesn't even care what she is. He's messed up." Every sentence dug deeper into his skin, carving scars no one could see. Aurora noticed too, though she never said it outright. She began to glance at him differently, as though measuring the distance between them, as though weighing the danger of his presence. There were moments when her eyes lingered on him, not with suspicion, but with something softer, something questioning. But each time she turned away, Liam felt the sting of a choice he hadn't yet made but feared was already being made for him. He wanted to believe she understood, that she saw through the rumors and lies, but trust was fragile, and Aurora had been betrayed too many times before to offer it freely. The betrayal didn't need to be real to poison what they had. The mere suggestion was enough. Liam began to doubt himself, to wonder if his presence only hurt her, if the whispers attaching his name to hers were a weight she should never be forced to carry. He imagined her hating him for it, blaming him for the shadows that grew thicker around her. The fear twisted inside him until every look she gave him, every silence between them, felt like confirmation of his worst thoughts, that he was the one pulling her deeper into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. Still, the whispers did not stop. They grew louder, sharper, until they were no longer whispers but accusations. His friends turned colder, their laughter replaced with sneers, their loyalty dissolved into suspicion. Strangers stared openly, some with disgust, others with cruel amusement. Everywhere he went, Liam felt the eyes, the judgment, the unspoken question of why he couldn't stop himself from being drawn to her. It didn't matter that he had never confessed, never crossed the fragile line between them. In their eyes, guilt was written on him already, and guilt was enough to condemn. The poison seeped between him and Aurora like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Their moments, those fleeting seconds when their eyes met, when silence held more meaning than words, were now shadowed by doubt. Liam's heart still reached for her, desperate and unrelenting, but every step closer felt like a betrayal of its own, a risk that could destroy the only light he had left. He told himself he could endure the whispers, the judgment, the hatred, but the truth was heavier. If Aurora turned away from him, if she believed the poison they spread, he would have nothing left to hold on to. Cruelty has a way of multiplying when it finds a vulnerable target, and for Liam it came in waves, relentless, merciless, each one harder to endure than the last. What began as whispers and mocking smirks soon became louder, uglier, impossible to escape. At school, laughter followed him like a shadow. His friends, if he could still call them that, mocked him openly now, no longer disguising their contempt, Freak lover, they sneered when he passed by, shoving him into lockers, their voices sharp enough to slice through his already fragile defenses. Every insult carried the same venom, designed not just to wound him but to strip him of dignity, to remind him daily that he had chosen to love someone the world had decided was unworthy of it. The cruelty didn't stop at words. Books went missing from his bag. His locker was defaced with slurs scrawled in black marker. And once he found a torn photograph of Aurora shoved into his desk, as if to mock his secret. He never told her about it. He couldn't. The thought of her knowing the depth of their hatred terrified him more than the hatred itself. He wanted to protect her, even if it meant shouldering the weight alone. But silence became its own kind of prison, and with every unspoken wound he felt himself unraveling. Teachers noticed, but turned away. Authority was blind where cruelty was loudest, and Liam learned quickly that no one would step in to defend him. That realization dug deeper than any insult. He was alone. And Aurora, though she carried her own share of pain, seemed further from him than ever. He wanted to reach for her, to tell her that the hatred wasn't hers to carry alone, that he felt it too. But he feared that dragging her closer would only tighten the noose around them both. At home, the cruelty followed him like a curse. His father, sharp-eyed and suspicious, began to notice Liam's withdrawn behavior. "You're hiding something," he accused one evening, his voice rough with anger. Liam denied it, but the truth clung to him like smoke. His father's words cut as deeply as his peers. Except at home, the cruelty came with fists slammed against tables, with threats layered in silence. His mother looked away, too afraid to intervene. There was no refuge, no safe place where Liam could breathe without the weight of society pressing down on him. The constant pressure twisted Liam's thoughts, turning love into something jagged, dangerous. His obsession with Aurora no longer felt like a secret sanctuary. It felt like a fire consuming him, one he couldn't control. He replayed every insult, every shove, every mocking laugh until it echoed louder than his own heartbeat. The world wanted to break him, to strip him of his humanity for daring to love her, and he felt himself teetering on the edge of madness. Nights became the worst. Dark hours filled with restless pacing, with thoughts that clawed at his mind. He imagined ways to silence them, to make the cruelty stop, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. Aurora remained his only light, but even her presence grew distorted under the weight of his torment. When he saw her smile, he feared it was fading. When she looked at him, he wondered if pity was hidden in her gaze. His paranoia gnawed at the fragile bond between them, turning affection into desperation, need into obsession. The more society pushed against him, the tighter he clung to her in his thoughts, until she became not just someone he loved, but the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. But cruelty is patient. It doesn't stop when its victim breaks. It waits for that break to deepen, for cracks to widen into chasms. Liam began to feel that pull, the sensation of being dragged somewhere darker, somewhere irreversible. The world had made it clear. To love her was to suffer, to be exiled, to be destroyed. And though his heart refused to let go, his mind began to fracture under the unrelenting weight of their hatred. The choice was never supposed to come to this. For Liam, love had always felt like survival, the only thread keeping him tethered to a world intent on tearing him apart. But cruelty doesn't relent. It forces decisions, cornering its victims until they have nothing left but impossible options. The more he loved Aurora, the more dangerous it became, not just for him but for her. What began as whispers had grown into venomous shouts, into threats scribbled in bathroom stalls, into glares that followed them like shadows, even when they weren't together. And Liam knew the world wasn't only after him, it was after her too. He could see it in Aurora's eyes, though she never said it outright. The exhaustion that weighed on her each day seemed heavier now, as if the rumors tying her to him were another stone added to the burden she already carried. When their eyes met across the classroom, there was no comfort anymore, only a question neither of them dared to speak. How much longer can this last? Liam wanted to promise forever, wanted to swear that nothing and no one could break what was burning between them. But promises mean little when the world is built to crush them. The pressure began to twist into a cruel demand. Choose love or choose survival. If he clung to Aurora, he risked dragging them both into ruin. His friends had already abandoned him. His father's suspicions had sharpened into dangerous rage, and every day the hostility around them grew more violent. It wasn't just name-calling anymore. It was threats muttered with intent, shoves that lingered too long, stares that promised something darker was coming. Liam could endure their hatred for himself, but the thought of Aurora suffering because of him cut deeper than anything else. And yet, the idea of walking away hollowed him out. Aurora was not just a girl he loved, she was his anchor, his light, his reason for enduring the darkness. Without her, survival felt meaningless, an existence stripped of the only thing that gave it shape. He thought of nights when her laughter had kept him from breaking, of moments when the simple curve of her smile had felt like salvation. To let her go would be to cut out his own heart, to live as an empty shell while the world congratulated itself for forcing him into obedience. He began to live inside that tension, pulled between desire and despair. His mind spun through scenarios, each more devastating than the last. If he chose love, he imagined the violence escalating, imagined the day Aurora would no longer be safe because of him. If he chose survival, he imagined watching her walk away, imagined her light dimming until he was swallowed whole by the void she left behind. Both paths ended in ruin, and yet he was being forced to choose. The walls around him tightened, suffocating. At school he felt hunted, every hallway a gauntlet of eyes and whispers. At home his father's silence was worse than his shouting, a ticking time bomb that threatened to explode at the faintest sign of truth. Even his dreams betrayed him, offering visions of Aurora's touch only to rip them away, leaving him gasping in the dark. The choice loomed over him like a sentence waiting to be carried out. Love or survival, her or himself. And each day, as the hatred grew louder, as the shadows crept closer, Liam felt the thread holding him together fray thinner and thinner. In the end, there was no victory, no gentle resolution, only the wreckage of what could never survive. Love had carried them as far as it could, but the weight of cruelty, the poison of whispers, the endless violence of a world that refused to let them exist together, it was too much. Liam had always believed Aurora was his light, the fragile flame keeping him alive in the storm. But even light can burn out when smothered by shadows. The final days were marked by silence, a silence heavier than any insult or threat. Aurora stopped meeting his eyes the way she once did. Her smile, when it appeared, was fragile, ghostly, as though it cost her more than she could give. Liam felt it slipping, her presence, their bond, the fragile promise of something better. And yet he clung tighter, desperate to hold on to the only thing that still made him breathe. But desperation is dangerous, and the more he fought to keep her, the more he drove her into the same darkness he was drowning in. Society had already judged them, carved their fate in cruelty, and all that remained was the inevitable collapse. The betrayal of friends, the violence of home, the venom of strangers, all of it coiled around them like chains. And when the breaking point came, it was swift and merciless. The world tore them apart, leaving Liam hollow, stripped not only of the girl he loved, but of the innocence that once allowed him to believe love could save him. Hope did not survive. It was crushed beneath the weight of every voice that told him to fear her, every threat that warned him to stay away, every ounce of hatred that forced him to choose between his heart and his life. What remained was silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of ruin, the kind that lingers long after everything worth holding on to has been destroyed. In that silence, innocence lay buried, and with it the fragile dream that love could ever conquer the darkness.